Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into one of the most massive, totally game-changing population shifts in human history. I'm talking about the monumental movement of literally millions of people pulling up stakes from quiet rural villages and pouring into roaring industrial cities. We're going to explore how the Industrial Revolution didn't just give us new technology, it fundamentally rewired exactly where and how we lived.
Think about it. Imagine a world dictated entirely by the sun and the changing of the seasons. That was reality for generations. But what happens when humanity is suddenly ruled by the rigid, mechanical ticking of the factory clock? Before 1760, life revolved almost entirely around agriculture. Today, though, we're going to see how the Industrial Revolution basically reprogrammed what it means to live, to work, and to function in a modern society.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, a great migration begins. Second, drivers of displacement. Third, the urban public health crisis. Fourth, the new division of labor. And finally, the legacy of reform.
All right, starting with Section 1. A great migration begins, from the countryside to the city.
This massive shift kicks off in Britain around 1760. For centuries, workers farmed small plots under the open field system or worked in small-scale cottage industries. But as these huge, imposing factories began to rise in cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, and London, well, those traditional cottage industries were wiped out fast. Whole regions of the English countryside practically emptied out in just a single generation as families packed up looking for a totally new way of life. And get this, staggering statistic. By 1850, the majority of Britain's population lived in cities for the very first time in history. This insanely fast rural-to-urban migration totally reshaped families and daily life. It was a real turning point in modern civilization, a pattern that would soon echo across Europe, Japan, and the US.
Moving to Section 2, drivers of displacement. Pushed from the land. Now, people didn't just wake up one morning, stretch, and say, hey, let's trade our ancestral farms for the smog of the city. No, they were pushed. They were driven by incredibly powerful economic and environmental forces that left them basically zero choice. Take the Enclosure Acts, passed by the British Parliament between roughly 1750 and 1850. This was the legal process of converting shared common lands, the exact lands everyday people relied on to survive, into privately owned fenced-off fields. The result? Thousands of tenant farmers suddenly lost their livelihoods. With the land literally walled off, these displaced families were left with only one realistic path: chasing steady wages in the new textile mills and ironworks of the big cities.
And this displacement wasn't just an English phenomenon. Look at this devastating figure: 1 million. That represents the catastrophic human toll of the Irish famine in the 1840s. A horrific potato blight destroyed the staple crop, killing roughly 1 million people. And the sheer desperation of the situation forced another million to emigrate. Hundreds of thousands of Irish migrants crossed the Irish Sea, pouring into expanding industrial centers like Liverpool and Glasgow, just trying to survive. These combined economic and environmental pressures, they permanently altered the ethnic makeup of major cities.
Which brings us to Section 3, the urban public health crisis, the era of the shock city.
So, this desperate flood of migration funneled enormous numbers of workers into expanding industrial centers that had, frankly, zero municipal planning. None. It strained infrastructure to the absolute breaking point. Just look at this. In 1772, Manchester was a pretty modest town of roughly 25,000 people. By 1850, it had surged to over 300,000. Just imagine the basic infrastructure of a small town suddenly trying to support a massive, sprawling city. Housing, water, sanitation, it was all pushed way, way past the breaking point.
The human cost here was just absolutely staggering. Families were crammed into overcrowded tenements right next to the belching smokestacks of the factories. Because sanitation was practically non-existent, devastating waterborne diseases like cholera swept through these neighborhoods over and over, killing thousands. And perhaps most tragically of all, children as young as 6 were laboring in cotton mills and coal mines under brutal, dangerous conditions. Conditions that honestly shocked visiting reformers and foreign observers alike. But the crucial point here is that these horrific conditions did eventually spur action. A major player in this was Edwin Chadwick. His famous 1842 report exhaustively documented the filth and disease ravaging these working-class neighborhoods. He clearly exposed the profound public health crises caused by all that overcrowding and contaminated water. His work was absolutely instrumental in pushing Parliament to pass the Public Health Act of 1848. This finally forced cities to improve drainage and water supplies under national law, pairing up with earlier victories like the Factory Acts of 1833 and 1844, which actually started restricting child labor and limiting working hours.
Let's look at Section 4, the new division of labor, the mechanization of humanity.
Beyond the sprawling, crowded cities themselves, the Industrial Revolution fundamentally changed the very nature of work. It eroded traditional crafts and drastically reduced the autonomy a worker had over their own day. I mean, compare these two realities for a second. On the one hand, you have the pre-industrial artisan, the skilled worker who controlled their craft from start to finish. They owned the whole process, the whole shebang. On the other hand, the industrial factory worker. Instead of mastering a trade, this worker was relegated to performing a single, repetitive, mechanical operation over and over and over again, totally dictated by the speed of the machine.
This massive shift is what we call the division of labor. It's a factory production model that takes complex manufacturing tasks and slices them up into single, repetitive mechanical steps. A really famous example of this took place at the Lowell Mills in Massachusetts. Young women, known as mill girls, lived in company-run boarding houses and spent grueling, incredibly long shifts just repeating one mechanical operation. It was highly efficient for production, sure, and mill owners across Britain and America rapidly copied the model.
And this labor force just kept growing. After 1892, millions of immigrants poured through Ellis Island in New York, arriving from places like Italy, Eastern Europe, and Ireland. They frequently entered manufacturing and mining, vastly expanding the industrial wage-earning class in the United States. So now we're looking at a massive, concentrated class of workers who all shared the exact same reality. They had almost no control over their own hours, their pay, or their safety conditions.
All right, our final section, Section 5, the legacy of reform, the fight for dignity.
Now, out of all that shared hardship came immense change. A growing awareness of this collective struggle really laid the groundwork for an enduring legacy of social and political reform across both sides of the Atlantic. Workers started to fight for their dignity. And this struggle didn't happen in a vacuum, right? It sparked a much broader conversation about human rights. Look at these intersecting movements. You had the Chartist movement in Britain demanding universal male suffrage and secret ballots just to give the working class a political voice. This intertwined with the monumental efforts of abolitionists like William Wilberforce, who secured the Abolition Act of 1807, ending the British slave trade, and later the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. These profound, game-changing victories for human dignity extended naturally straight into the push for factory reform and labor rights.
Let's actually trace this progress. In 1824, a massive hurdle was cleared when the British Parliament repealed the Combination Acts, which finally allowed workers to openly organize. This led to steady growth in trade unions, culminating in the formation of the Trades Union Congress in 1868. Meanwhile, across the pond in the United States, key figures were stepping up too, like Samuel Gompers, who founded the American Federation of Labor in 1886.
The absolute cornerstone of these organizations was collective bargaining. This is the strategy of organized labor movements negotiating directly with employers as a unified group, basically using strength in numbers to secure better wages, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. This development fundamentally shaped industrial society. It established the institutional groundwork for the modern minimum wage and the workplace safety standards that you and I still rely on today.
Which brings us to today. I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. We've seen how the incredible shift from farms to factories literally created the modern 9-to-5 workday and built the labor laws we know today. So, as we reflect on this monumental, historic shift from the agricultural season to the factory clock, what forces are rewriting the rules of your workday right now? How will our current technological revolution reshape the nature of work for the next generation? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.